So I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to recognise their continuing connection to the lands, seas, skies and waterways, and express my gratitude that we share this land today, my sorrow for some of the costs of that sharing, and my hope and belief that we can move to a place of peace, justice and partnership together. My name's Mel. I'm from Lutruwita, Tasmania. Really happy to be here with you today. I'm our Strategic Manager for Volunteer Engagement with Volunteering Tasmania, and also a long-time volunteer, really excited to be here and to be involved in these important conversations about our sector. So this session today is around focusing on multicultural perspectives. It will explore the diversity of volunteering in multicultural communities across Australia. We'll include presentations on two major new collaborative research projects on volunteering in culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And we have a wonderful panel of presenters over to my right here who I will introduce shortly. Just checking to see if there's any progress with the IT here. While we are waiting, I will introduce our first two presenters. Bingqin Li. Professor Bingqin Li is a Professor of the Social Policy Research Centre of the University of New South Wales. She received her PhDs from London School of Economics, UK, and Nankai University in China. Her research interest is in social policy governance. Her current research projects include collaborative governance, local governance of complex social programs, and volunteering and social isolation in cowed population. Ivan Wong got his Bachelor of Social Science degree from Chinese University of Hong Kong and Certificate in Education from the Hong Kong University. He is currently the General Manager, Home Ageing Services of CAS, which provide a wide range of services to the community, covering from childcare to aged care. So welcome our first two presenters.
Thank you, Mel. It's a great pleasure that today I can be here to share with you a research project that we did with the University of New South Wales in the last year. Before we move on that, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are here today, and I pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Before Bingqin reports on the research findings, I would like to give some background information about CAS Care so that you know a bit more about the purpose of this research and how we deliver this project. CAS was established in the year 1981, so we have a history of of more than 40 years, and we are based in Sydney. The services that we provide opens to everyone, but we have a very strong focus on people from East Asian background. And in our research project, we actually did the research targeting the Chinese people who are volunteering in our organization. At present, we provide a very wide range of services, and that ranges from home care, residential aged care, disability services, childcare, vocational and training, settlement and health services. And we also have promotion of Chinese language and culture activities. And most important of all, we also have special volunteering services. At present, every week, there are over 5,000 families who are using our different kinds of services. In terms of our volunteers, at present, we have more than 300 volunteers in our service. And volunteers are always the backbone of CAS. The volunteering, in our view, is a very important way that people participate in the community, especially for people from CORD background. Through volunteering, we actually noticed that we provide a very important pathway for them to participate in the wider society. And our general view about volunteering is that we treat them the same as paid staff members, except that they do not receive pay. And while doing the work in volunteering, we emphasize that there must be strong governance and volunteer management to make things work. And while we are doing that, we have an internal volunteer management structure, starting from the board of directors, and then we have a volunteer affairs coordination committee. And then we have volunteer development team under our corporate affairs unit. And then at the bottom of the structure is different service units which use volunteers in their services. In terms of governance, we believe that while we are operating the volunteering services in this scale, there must be some sort of governance to make things work. So we have volunteers, policies and procedures. For volunteers that come to our center, we have an initial interview to know about them and then know their interests, their needs. And we also arrange training, development. We develop code of conduct. We also do appraisal for them. And very important thing, we emphasize a lot on respect, dignity, recognition, awards. We have annual Thanksgiving luncheons. We share their stories through our social media. And one thing very important is about compliance. We also emphasize on this. Like when we provide services in aged care, the volunteers must have police checks. So basically, these are the ways that we operate the volunteering services. And then I'll pass on to Bingqin to talk about her research work in our services in the last year.
Thank you. I noticed that the PPT doesn't work, so then I wouldn't just stick to the PPT, and probably it's more interesting. And I think we are, this is a project we have done together with CAS, and I'm from a Social Policy Research Center from UNSW. And in our center, we advocate co-designed and collaborative research. And we think this approach helps us. Not only we prescribe or tell the practitioners what to do or collect data, they supply data to us for us to publish papers. We actually try to work together. We learn from them, and then similar to David Cosby said earlier, that we also document what are the strengths and what are the issues these organizations are facing, and so that they can get their voice out, and at the same time, we also generate public goods for other service providers to share. So we think this is a very useful practice. And what we try to learn from CAS is that basically in the multicultural society in Australia, one of the main issues is that we look at that in Australia, the older people, Australian people, can speak more than 260 languages. What does this mean? It means that our social service system can potentially be super fragmented. And the cultural knowledge and also the resources needed to provide language and culturally appropriate services can be very, very demanding. And I used to study a lot of social policy services in developing countries. I thought they were facing big challenge. But when I see this, I think this is one of the biggest challenges in the world. So as a result, you can see, particularly in the older immigrant population, a lot of them are disoriented and depressed or dependent. We call them 3D, older people. And then, of course, the government also came up with some solutions. For example, organize activity groups for them, or provide orientation services for them. And also in the community, there were services, people, self-service, helping each other. But then there is a missing link here. And the service providers like CAS And they have a shortage of this kind of potential supply of labor to be able to help their services to become be more culturally targeted for the people, the users. And at the same time, the older people, they are not only happy that I am looked after. A lot of these older people actually want to contribute to the society and want to become self-reliance. And this procedure, it's this kind of demand, meeting this kind of demand itself can improve their own subjective well-being as well. So there needs to be some sort of linkage between the services and between the contribution and the subjective well-being of the older people. So then we conduct this research. We ask older people, and we also volunteers in class, and also we look at talk to the class people from different levels to understand exactly what they have done in the past 40 years to be able to gather so many volunteers, and particularly in the Chinese community, and which is not culturally volunteer, very active volunteer culture traditionally. And then when people come here, how can they decide to participate and work for so many years with class in some of the jobs here in the Chinese context would be considered to be dirty jobs culturally. So then what we look at the way they try to do, apart from the care job, outside the main care job, what they have produced is these kind of activity groups. Superficially, it looks similar to the local authorities' activities group. But what they have been doing is to create activity groups and offer training to these group leaders and let them participate in class service later, and also including the management of the class. And also at the same time, class help them to develop volunteer skills, develop the leadership skills for the volunteer activities. And then what you, the essence is that through the activities to create a low entry barrier for the migrant population, so that they can become interested in reaching out to the society at the beginning, and then learn more about the social services, and at the same time later to move on to become volunteers in the services or even in the wider society. So this path is very important and help them to be better integrated in the society and contribute to the society. So what we have, we asked the people what is their experience, what they value the most. And of course, interestingly, what we have found, the benefit they get is very similar to the Health Direct here in the website, and also in Volunteer Australia website. They talk about the benefit, very similar. So it's a similar story, but the main issue they value the most have several perspectives. One is the type of training and knowledge they gain through volunteer activity. And also the kind of venue, for example, CAS provides venue or socialize, the social network CAS can provide, including with local councils. That actually help these disoriented older people to be able to lower the barrier, make it easier for them to participate. And also insurance CAS also have provided for them. And sometimes older people are not happy with each other as well. And then CAS will also offer them coaching for the local volunteer organizers to how to deal with conflicts within the. So these kind of know-how are particularly important for them to continue. And so what we can observe is a kind of a ripple effect. It started from these kind of activities, and then you can observe the older people help each other. And then further, you can see them volunteer outside their own groups. And within CAS, there are many groups, and they go to different groups to volunteer. And further, what you can see is that they decide to participate in the service provision. For example, call service, on the phone call hotline service, and these kind of within CAS. And then later, they also, some of them go out of CAS and they learned some skills. They were very proud to say that I have experienced work. I know I learned these tricks of how to volunteer, organize volunteer, and then I can help other groups to outside CAS also to organize their volunteer activities. And the last one is that some of them even ventured into kind of Chinese language groups and to bridge connections between different communities. And so as a result, we think that we were trying to say, what does this mean? It means that there needs to be some sort of volunteer incubation for people who are not familiar with the Australian system. This kind of incubation is different from sort of a business incubation, but to support volunteers and also organizers of volunteer activities, to empower them to be able to better participate in the volunteer activities, particularly when they are not familiar with the system at all. And so then we think that there can be some sort of a policy implications for this. CAS is a large organization operated for more than 40 years. And of course, they have a lot of knowledge they can share, but not all cloud service providers are as big, and they may not have such capacity. And then probably at this point, there would be opportunities for the government to be somewhat more involved, or the community, other organizations in a certain way to work together. And then also, particularly in some cloud communities, within the communities, there are multiple cloud populations these days as well. So for our future research, we also try to look at other non-Chinese communities, including Korean and the Indonesian communities, and try to see these kind of practice that has been used in the Chinese community. Can they also benefit other communities? And also, what adaptation needs to be made in order to improve, further integrate more cloud communities. And I will just stop here and thank you.
This group were that volunteering, and some of this is sort of stating the obvious, really, I think, but it is, as David Crosby was saying earlier, great to actually have the evidence base. So we found that volunteering is culturally embedded in multicultural communities, and the whole community actually receives the benefits of that work. Multicultural volunteers enjoy enhanced social engagement and belonging, again, stating the obvious really, but the wider community benefits greatly also. Multicultural volunteers sometimes feel shut out from what we've called mainstream volunteering, and there has been evidence in the report of some racism experienced by volunteers, mainly through exclusion from participation, recognition and decision making. And the focus groups clearly stated that multicultural volunteer stories need to be told and shared more widely. The survey findings were very interesting. We felt that obviously most of the volunteering that is called volunteering anyway occurs in not-for-profit organisations, but there is a lot of other activity giving back to community that is not called volunteering. Mostly it occurs within the local community, and again, that may be because of feeling excluded from other participation. The desire to help others is the main reason for volunteering and community participation, but the second motivation is for community connection, and that came through very clearly. Volunteers are generally very optimistic about continuing to volunteer into the future. Over 92% of the volunteers supported the notion that volunteering can positively impact migrant settlement, and I think that goes to what you were saying already. It is a big benefit to people. Over 90% of New South Wales residents volunteer outside their ethnic or cultural groups. 83% of residents share their ethnic and cultural knowledge whilst volunteering. 63% of residents feel that multicultural volunteers are well represented in volunteer involving organisations. And 85% of volunteers agreed that to some extent diversity is valued in volunteer involving organisations, but only to some extent. I'll let Paul talk further on the findings of the racism within the volunteering space, but the predominant message is that volunteering is actually very much happening in multicultural communities, and that volunteering has a great impact both on the individual and on the community as well. Over to you, Paul, for the detail.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. I'll dive into the detail of this, and I will need the clicker for this one too. I will repeat a couple of things Gemma said. First of all, respect to the elders past and present whose land we meet on today. Like Mel, I share the land with the Palawa mob down in Lutruwita. Shout out to the crew down there. Just recapping on what Gem said, the original purpose of this research was there's a lot of research out there at the moment, or an emerging body of research like Bingqin's and others. Mario, are you in the room? A few others out there, which looks at particular ethnic or cultural communities. But there's not a lot of research that actually looks at the multicultural other as a collective, as opposed to, I guess, the Anglo-Australian sort of cultural dominant strain in the country at the moment. But it's interesting, we think of Anglo-Australians as being cultural dominant, but 56% of people in New South Wales have at least one parent who was born overseas. And we intentionally, with this research, adopted the term multicultural as opposed to cold. One, because when we were talking to people about elders, culturally linguistic diverse, they didn't really know what it meant. Multicultural is a more normative, more well understood term. But also it includes obviously the people who look different from the Anglo-Australian norm, but there's a lot of other cultural variations, and people don't just express in their cultural heritage in Australia as Chinese or Indonesian or Irish or whatever. There's a real melting pot. People identify with multiple cultures as part of their own cultural identity. So it was important for us to, just as a point of difference with this research, to say, how do the experiences of those non-Anglo-Australians compare to the experiences of the dominant or the majority culture? So we had this mixed method research design. We had the focus groups. Ivan actually was a participant in the focus groups, a very generous contributor to that. And there were 4 groups, 4 people each, went for about 90 minutes, really rich detail from that. Because as indicated before, there's not a lot of documented or academic or even, private research around the different aspects of multicultural volunteering. We used the information from that to build our population survey, and I'll show you the questions and how we arrived at them as part of this. And we surveyed 835 people. We got 835 valid responses from, I think, those 35 partner organisations who amplified the message out there. We had the survey translated into 12 different languages. to make them accessible to people as well, so people could answer in their own language or the language they were most comfortable answering in. We had responses, people identified 92 different ethnic and cultural groups. So we felt we had a broad spectrum of different cultural identities, and that's alongside, or that's separate to those people who identified as Anglo-Australian. So we were able to break them into 3 groups for analysis: those Anglo-Australians who responded, those multicultural Australians who spoke English, and those who didn't speak English fluently or self-identified as not speaking fluent English. And that was a really interesting distinction, because the experiences of all 3 groups were actually quite different, as I'll start to show here. So Gemma ran through these, but I'll just touch on them again. From the focus groups, we identified 5 themes. The first theme was around culture. So volunteering is culturally embedded in multicultural communities. And I know Gemma was saying that's obvious, and it is obvious to the people here, but it goes to what was being said in the plenary this morning, that what's obvious to you and I isn't necessarily obvious to members of cabinet sitting up the hill or other people that you work with. So it is important to get this information down and have evidence for it, as we have here. And interestingly, but again, not surprising for those of you who work in these spaces, the recipients of acts of volunteering are at the centre of the experience, not the volunteer. So there's this real strong theme of humility we saw come through in all our research here around multicultural volunteering. Around activity, again, going to the messaging this morning, acts of volunteering by multicultural communities are sometimes undervalued. That was the experiences of the focus group. And the ways volunteers culturally behave is sometimes misunderstood. And a classic example of that is that humility. So when they were interacting with Anglo-Australian, say, volunteer managers, their humility was taken as ignorance or stupidity, perhaps. So they were spoken down to or marginalised, given, token work that didn't actually match to their skills or experiences, when really all they were being was just humble about their role and interactions. The benefits: multicultural volunteers enjoy enhanced social engagement and belonging, as evidenced by Bingqin's research. And also the wider community benefits. It's not just multicultural volunteers. So we're not just doing it necessarily, we're not trying to promote multicultural volunteering to make multicultural Australians feel better about themselves. The benefits spill over to the entire community. Multicultural volunteers sometimes feel shut out from mainstream volunteering, which again, is a bit of a truism. And this includes exclusion from participation, recognition and decision making. I want one of you later to ask me the question, which has been asked a few times throughout this conference: how can we better include multicultural volunteers? Because I probably have more of a fast track grenade throwing approach to that than better engagement. And support, the fifth theme. More data on multicultural volunteering needs to be collected. As an academic researcher, when I went to the literature, there was none. There's some reasonable stuff coming out of New Zealand. There's a little bit of it in the US, especially around Hispanic communities. Canada, a little bit around First Nations there, a little bit of First Nations in the US, but there's really not a lot around this. And I think Bingqin, or I think it was Ivan made the point before, or Bingqin made the point, that we've actually got a fairly unique cultural experience in Australia with these 240 languages being spoken. So it's quite interesting. There's a short section in the report on the history of multiculturalism in New South Wales, which we kind of remember from school, but really opened my eyes to just how diverse multiculturalism is in this country. So more data needs to be collected and the stories need to be told. So this informed our research design. So unfortunately, and this is one of the big problems with applied research, you can't take the voices of 16 people and generalise for the entire community from that. We had some good themes, but we actually wanted to know, was this, a biased little sample telling us their own point of view, or was this generally felt in the community? So this is what took us to the larger survey, the 835 people. And the key findings around participation, Gemma went through these, so I won't go into them too much detail. They predominantly volunteer in not-for-profits, occurs within their local community, and their desire to help and community connection are the main drivers. and optimistic about future intentions. Where it gets interesting is we start to break it down. So for multicultural volunteers fluent in English, for example, they were volunteering most frequently by teaching, coaching, or providing administrative or resource support, which is, you know, a category of volunteering which is generally true of others as well. Their main motives for volunteering were to support a cause, so it was cause-based volunteering. And a lack of time and burnout were the main things preventing them volunteering more. Whereas for those without English language fluency, there was a lot less diversity in their volunteering. I think multicultural volunteers with English and others were volunteering across 3 or 4 different organisations or in 3 or 4 different volunteering capacities. It was down to about 2 for those without English fluency. And their main motivation to volunteer, beyond supporting a cause and others, was to use their skills and experience to really try this stuff out. And again, that's linked to the theme we found earlier about marginalisation. And yes, time prevented them volunteering more, but they just didn't know how to go about it. They'd just never been asked. So one of the biggest barriers to them volunteering was just not knowing how to volunteer, despite their desire. I won't go through these questions in detail at all, especially given time, but these were the questions we asked. This is what we go into the report. We asked never, sometimes, often, always around all of these questions. We also asked the good old strongly agree, disagree questions around these statements as well. I'll let them come up, but there's fairly detailed analysis in the report on this. And in fact, I've been doing the state of volunteering reports for a number of years now for pretty much all the states. And one of the things that blew me away with this one was just how much data we had, to the point where to report it all in a concise way, it actually makes it a little bit dry reading in the report and the differences. So I apologise for that. Future iterations will do better. But I will get into the racism one because that's interesting. We asked people about have they ever observed or experienced racism in volunteering, and we asked them across 4 dimensions. Have you observed or experienced it from the general community, from the people you're volunteering for, from fellow volunteers, or from volunteer managers? I don't think it's controversial to say generally that volunteering isn't free from it. But what we also see from this is that volunteering isn't necessarily a safe space from racism. Like, I think some of us like or want to believe that, you can be, volunteering's protected from racism, that we're creating safe spaces for people to operate. It's not perfectly or always true. As the data shows. Yeah, okay. But yeah, look, one of the things we found, and this goes into detail in the report, now I'm stuck in this situation where my old man glasses aren't on, so I can't actually see what I've written. But I'll go through very quickly. Basically, people outside of Greater Sydney in regional New South Wales were far more likely to experience or observe racism than people in the cities. People who volunteer more, the longer you volunteer, the more likely you are to experience or observe racism as well. The other categories, gender didn't really make much of a difference. English language fluency typically didn't make it that much of a difference as well. Yeah, they're probably, age was it's the other determinant. Generally, if you were younger, you were more likely to have observed or experienced versus older people, but that may again be the way racism is subjectively defined. And we didn't say this is what racism is, we allowed people to define it for themselves, and perhaps younger people are more socially attuned to and aware of it and more likely to call it out in a survey like this. Very quickly to wrap up, one of the big challenges with this survey was it's a first of its kind. We haven't had the opportunity or chance yet to replicate the findings in other markets, and it's really hard to get people to respond, as Zach, our project manager up there, can tell. So one of the things that we'd really like to see, and we've made these questions open to everyone, is other people take advantage of, you know, the methodology, tweak it if you like, but really start asking the questions in the community around your volunteers or the volunteers that you intersect with, around their experiences of these things, and, you know, give them that voice. The big concluding slide. I didn't have one anyway. Sit down. We'll let you guys ask some questions. Thank you.
We almost got through. Apologies, everyone. Thank you very much, Gemma and Paul. That was really interesting. And as Gemma mentioned, please, on your way out, grab a copy of this fabulous key findings report, which I love all of the visual graphs and infographics. So well done, volunteering, Centre for Volunteering New South Wales and Institute of Project Management. All right. We've got about half an hour now for question time. So we do have a mic which Chris can bring to you. We do have our online audience to consider, so I will repeat the question for them. If we can try and keep it nice and succinct, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi there. I have a quick one for about the first presentation. And I wonder if it's something that I missed because couldn't see the slides. But I was interested in the type of volunteers that your organization engages in terms of like age groups, for example. Many times in aged care you engage like older volunteers themselves, and I wonder if that was the case as well. Thanks.
Okay, so just summarising and repeating the question, it was directly for Ivan, I believe, around CAS and the volunteers that they're engaging with.
As I just mentioned earlier, at present we have over 300 volunteers that are doing some work in our organisation. And the majority of them are volunteers in our social groups. Because in our social groups, they are not government funded. Basically, they're a group of seniors people getting together, and those groups are self-help. So we need leaders, we need people who prepare the refreshment, who arrange the venue, who arrange the activities. So a lot of our volunteers are coming from those groups. But also, as Bingqin also mentioned earlier, we actually have a kind of rippling effect. And these volunteers will sometimes move on to other service areas, like our telephone hotline for people who have mental health needs, or other government-funded services to the frail seniors. So they may go to other groups to like cook for the seniors or wash the dishes. So they do all this kind of work. But of course, some other volunteers may not go along this path. They may go straight into, say, our telephone hotline training programs and become a volunteer in the hotline. So these are the different kinds of volunteers who are helping in our services now.
Thanks, Ivan. Did you, sorry if I got distracted with realising we've got the slide up now that we really need it. Did you cover the demographics in terms of ages of your volunteers as per the question, please?
The majority of our volunteers are now seniors over the age of 65. We also have some women and young people in our services. Yeah, but I think more than 80% of them are seniors.
Great, thank you. Down the front, actually, I think sorry, we've already got the mic up there for a question. Thank you.
Right. So hi, I'm Anna Tate from Eastern Volunteers in Victoria in Melbourne. I'm actually involved in the VMA project for the Eastern Metro region of Melbourne. So I've been working very closely over the past 6 months with new migrants in our community. We're a very multicultural community in the east of Melbourne. And what came across really clearly to me through forums and discussions with various groups when I've been out talking to them about how volunteering can be a benefit to them is the cost. And when it comes down to a choice of whether they can feed their families or actually volunteering. And I was just curious whether that came through in your report as well, whether that was an issue. Because previously pre-COVID, it wasn't quite such an issue, but it's becoming a stronger and stronger voice. And the lack of transport. A lot of very new migrants don't have Australian driving licenses. They can't get to the volunteering opportunities. So that's what came through strongly for us. And we also had that strong with the racism as well, but it was very made clear to us that it was kind of that not overt racism, but that sort of implied just lack of cultural understanding. And we have so many cultures within Eastern Melbourne. So, sorry, comments.
Great, thank you. So the question was around the cost of volunteering for people from multicultural backgrounds, so being covering their expenses and transport challenges, and also experience of racism.
So yeah, 3 and 4 on the list, cost and transport as the big issues. Now, we didn't quantify costs in this report, so what does it typically cost to volunteer? But we know from the state of volunteering research in New South Wales, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, experts in the room, it costs about $1,900 per year on average for a New South Wales resident to volunteer in terms of out-of-pocket costs, which are quite significant. And it's fairly on par with what we've seen in the other states like Victoria, Queensland, Tassie, WA as well. So yeah, cost is a big one, and I guess we didn't emphasise it as much in this report because that's actually common to all volunteers. But yeah, interestingly, just looking at the data here too, lack of transport is a bigger issue for people without English language fluency than cost, by a small amount, sort of thing. So cost is 3 and 4 for multicultural fluent, and with multicultural with English as an additional language, it's switched. Yeah, so yeah, very confirmatory, and and it's interesting that you raise that because that's actually something that we can very easily and tangibly fix with resources. Yeah.
And just on that, in regional areas, it is particularly difficult with particularly transport because there is not much public transport. We are just about to start the next State of Volunteering report in New South Wales, and I'm fairly certain that we will have even higher figures of disadvantage when it comes to cost and transport.
Well, in our research, we don't quantify the cost and the benefits that is in our volunteering services. But I'll say that there must be cost. And our experience is that we get far more benefits out from developing our volunteers. Now, for the cost, there is really a lot. Just like in our case, when we provide volunteering services in aged care, then we need things like police check that cost money. You may need to train them up with first aid, manual handling, all those things. And also, our experience is that if you don't invest in volunteer training and management, we really can't get the benefit. Like in the multicultural communities, actually there are a lot of people who don't know very much about the meanings of volunteering. A lot of them has a very bad image or stigma on volunteers. Like these people are only, have too much time and they kill their time, or volunteers only do minor duties, or they just clean the floors, or just ask them to clean the floors. So there are a lot of misconceptions. So we have to train them up. And actually, we also need to train the community to make them have a positive view on volunteers. So there are really a lot to invest on. But the benefits, I'll say, can always be far from our imagination. I can always see volunteers who have extremely strong sense of responsibility. They are very reliable, very committed. They are positive. They embrace changes. They always want to do things good in a way which is better than paid staff members. So there are a lot of advantages of training up these volunteers. Although in this conference, I also hear a lot of speakers or people saying about the difficulties. Like when you train up the volunteers, or they got the skill and then they get employment, they got a job and they leave. They are not stable. You invest a lot of time and efforts and then they leave. Well, this happens. Yeah, this happens. Yeah, and
happens in the commercial world too.
Yeah. You yes, at the end you get two who stay long. It's still great benefit to your organization.
Great points, thank you. I'm sure we'll be all very happy when the day comes when there are no out-of-pocket expenses for our volunteers. I think, was there initially a question in the middle here, Christian, from the beginning, and then we'll come down the front.
Hi, my name's Christine. I'm a consultant who works with volunteer involving organisations. I do a lot of work with councils, and I know there's a real desire to...
I'm so sorry.
To work with and support volunteering in multicultural communities. They know it's happening already. Do you have any advice on how to approach that, how to support and work with and work together to just, continue to grow volunteering both in the multicultural, throughout their council area, really?
Councils are a very different beast to other tiers of government. I actually like working with councils because they're actually the ones who are most working at the coalface. So they're active members of their community. All the councillors work and are servicing, all the councillors themselves, but the staff as well are all working in their community. And I think it goes to this bigger thing of, I've never met someone who doesn't want to volunteer. And there's very few people I've met who actually don't volunteer. And when you really probe, what do you do? When you do a time and motion study, what do you do with your hours every day and in the week and everything? So many more people volunteer than what the ABS tells us they do as well. So, stage one is showing them it's everywhere. And it's really framing volunteering as a solution to their problems. And it goes, I think David in the last presentation made the really good point, which is something I'm passionate about, is don't measure output or throughput. We did these many volunteer hours, we did these, we provided this number of services, etc. It showed the impact and the benefit, the why you did it in the first place sort of thing. And if you can link that why to a problem that they have at the community level, whether it's around community engagement, economic development, social integration, inclusion, whatever, every council has a strategic plan. Every council has, these strategic objectives it wants to achieve. It has its values as an organisation it aspires to and everything like that. If you can very clearly link the outcomes of volunteering activity and explicitly link them to these strategic objectives and show how you're achieving their objectives without them actually trying, and all they need to do is do this little bit more to support you on a little bit, and you can exponentially enlarge those benefits and outcomes, and you can give them photo ops, and opportunities to, cut ribbons and kiss babies associated with it. That's what I've found is the best path to working with local government, both elected members and the sort of managers of the different departmental levels.
Yeah, already on it. Thank you.
From our research project, we sort of see that CAS is an organization that it has the capacity to actually organize. But then because there are so many services that also need volunteers or also need people who can do this kind of transition. And but they do not necessarily have the time, expertise, knowledge, and resources. And then what council can potentially do is within the council work with organizations like CAS, and then try to bridge knowledge between different practitioners, and also try to create a hub of volunteer innovation and volunteer incubation, we were trying to say. And then this kind of hub where people can gather and then formally or informally, and would be able to, that's what we were trying to say, that this kind of a incubator idea, and that can well happen within the service providers and the council space.
I also want to respond. I think in the community, no one or no single organization survives alone by itself. We all work together with each other and are helping each other. Just like council, well, in CAS, we also work very closely with councils. We are helping each other, just like in volunteering. Say, for example, we receive a request from councils for our volunteers. When they organize events, like HK Information Expo, then they will ask our volunteers to help in like packing the information bags. We organize about 10 volunteers, go to council and put everything into the bag, and then pack about 200-300 bags in few hours time. And then we also arrange sometimes interpreters to help on the day. Yeah. And of course, council always do something good to us. Otherwise, I won't arrange volunteers to help them. So sometimes, like when I just mentioned, everything costs money. Like when we need, say, money for doing the police check, organize first aid trainings, sometimes council and other government departments also give us some funding support. So in terms of resources, when we say that about cost is an issue, then we also need to think about where to get those resources. Yeah. And also council always through their community grant support our volunteer trainings. So they give the money, they provide the venue. So all these are the ways that we work together with council and other organizations as well.
And final word from me. It's really about the true value of volunteering, and the local government agencies that we work with, the best ones are those that truly value volunteering, and they have a position on council actually dedicated to the volunteering experience. And it isn't just a let's get some volunteers to pack bags every so often for an expo or something like that. It's really valuing the experience of volunteering and what it gives the whole community. There's been mention of things like preparedness and managing disasters and all of that. The LGAs where that works really well are those that have got volunteering at front of mind and are prepared with volunteering to be there. So value it.
Great. And certainly in Tasmania, we have some councils who are starting to include volunteering in their wellbeing strategies, which is really great, and certainly encourage you to have those conversations with your local councils. We've got a question down the front here.
Hi. This is a question both on the anecdotal level, if possible, and on the research level, if possible. Given the old adage, the greatest antidote to racism is exposure, is there any evidence from either perspective here that this multicultural volunteering does ease that racism over time, or the experiences of racism?
Yeah, what would really, it wasn't a focus of this research, and I think, given enough time, racism will be a self-correcting problem, and when I say enough time, I mean thousands of years. The question is, what are the interventions we can make to accelerate that process? And exposure is, it's not just racism, but other forms of discrimination as well, like homophobia, for example. until you've got, that gay friend or that black friend or whatever, then, oh, now I get it sort of thing. But that's a really long, long way to try and achieve it. I don't think I've come across any specific evidence for that. It does seem very anecdotal, but I haven't specifically been looking for it. But I think it is really interesting, and I'd be interested from a subjective point of view. So from the experience of people who've experienced racism, do you feel that your volunteering has, or your engagement with volunteering has reduced or, mitigated or, changed the behaviours of those around you? I'd be really curious to see that, and it is a limit of our research. We didn't ask a baseline question, which was, and this we say it in the report, if we'd have asked, how does this compare to your experience of racism in the general community? That would have been really interesting, and that's something we follow up with. But yeah, I'd love to dig into that more.
Well, to us, racism is not common, and I rarely heard about issues on racism. I think the main reason is that our service is quite focused in the multicultural communities, and as a result, our volunteers always work within a core environment. But that said, I can also see different people mixing together, like the Chinese volunteers, the Korean volunteers, Vietnamese volunteers, because we have quite a lot of different volunteers from different backgrounds, and we do have opportunities that we work together. And in general, I'll say that it's working quite well, and we are able to achieve something like understanding, acceptance, harmony, those things within the multicultural community. Yeah, but I did heard about some cases that when the volunteers go outside in the mainstream, they may come across some difficulties. Yeah.
Actually, I just had an experience a couple of weeks ago. I was in Saudi Arabia and talking so they've had a sort of big power shift in there, and they're opening a lot more up to women. In a way they have before. Women are, now allowed to drive. They're now allowed to move around the country without chaperones and things like that, which is really new and radical in that country. And culturally, it's very conservative, and it's not just a patriarchal belief that's always been in the society. My experience has been women have held true to these beliefs too. But I was talking to someone who was working in government. He was really frustrated because they've put a 30% quota on female hiring now in government. And they're going through that very painful experience in their minds of, my good mates are being dumped for quota-based places sort of thing. And I was actually trying to explain to him, and I don't think I did a particularly successful job of it, of how we went through that trauma in Australia, and we haven't solved the problem, but now we're a lot more comfortable with, women in executive and leadership and board roles in a way that we weren't 20 years ago. Now, I'm not saying it's fixed, but that's an example of exposure fixing the problem. And it's an example of how we can address things like racism, for example, by including. And this goes to the question I wanted to ask myself before when I was saying, ask me the solution to the problem. It's to how do we create better inclusion, is we have to give up our power. So power is, I heard power defined a couple of different ways before around information and stuff like that. But power is effectively the ability to make a decision on someone else's behalf. But if you cede that power to them and you let them make decisions and you include, them, not just engage them and listen to what they want and then make the decisions for them, but you include them in the decision-making seats and invite them to the table and be okay with them making decisions you don't agree with or don't feel right to you, that's when we're actually going to get that exposure and an improvement of, not just multiculturalism, but all forms of discrimination across society. But there, fix that. What's next?
All right, we've got time for, I think, one more question here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Earlier it was mentioned that the barrier to volunteering was not knowing how to go about it and not being asked to participate. Could you please give us some strategies on how to overcome those barriers?
So we had strategies on how to overcome barriers and not knowing how to participate, not being asked to participate. Yeah, how do we overcome them? Yep.
This is opinion as opposed to evidence-based, but sort of, you know, having been exposed to this for a long time, is it's in finding ambassadors and champions. So you won't be able to reach directly those people who aren't being asked, because through your channels, you're already asking, you're already trying to find out. What it's potentially about is finding those conduits, those ambassadors, those people from those communities who are champions and voices in those communities who are willing to speak on your behalf to reach those people you can't reach. Now, that again comes back to a lot of the stuff we've been saying here. You need to demonstrate your value to that person for them to invest their social capital in your cause to go and extend and amplify your message. So you need to be really clear on your value proposition. And if you don't know what your value proposition is, ask why you're doing what you do. Why do we rescue, you know, injured and orphaned wildlife? Why do we, you know, teach, you know, go into prisons to help people with their literacy? It's not just to do it for the sake of doing it. There's a why sitting behind it. When you can communicate that why and create those ambassadors and champions, they will become your force multipliers and help you reach into those communities and find those ones in their own language or in their own cultural appropriate context, who will be able to then amplify your message and connect those people to you. Oh, look, door knocking doesn't hurt, but you know, coming from a sales background, it's always better to get a warm intro than a cold one. So, you know, it's creating those warm and trusted intros that will get you the access in the long run.
Anything to add from the other panelists?
Well, I just want to suggest incubation. Yeah. I think too many organizations or too many cases I have heard of is people just think that, oh, volunteering or you recruit volunteers, it's just easy, get them and ask them to do the work. Yeah, but without training, development, growing them, monitoring them, it's very hard to be successful, I'll say. So you need to invest in them, incubate them so that they can work.
Just last one. Basically, if there can be some sort of a go-to point in the communities, if I want to participate in something, I know that is the place I should go, related to volunteer or even other services, complex of this kind of place, that can potentially help as well.
So that's so I want to be diverse, including other peers, but we still are that way. And it's finding out how people getting into the different community in the languages, let them know. And that's what I'm letting everyone know. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. A related question quickly before we wrap up, Paul. In your presentation, you had a point around the acts of volunteering by multicultural communities sometimes undervalued. I guess my question is by who? Who are they undervalued by?
On number one, by the volunteers themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that was really clear in the research, and we kind of, like, I won't say intuitively, but anecdotally aware that the way we define volunteering as Volunteering Australia, and, you know, I don't know if any of you were involved in the definition project a number of years ago that Claire led, but there was, you know, we came up with a very precise definition of volunteering, and, you know, I heard UNV today talking about formal versus informal volunteering, and I know those constructs of volunteering, what is it, time willingly given for the common good? Yeah. Without financial gain, yeah. So that very precise definition of volunteering doesn't fit you know, like I don't know if any of you, quite a few of you, I imagine, speak second languages. Words don't perfectly translate at the best of times. And when you put a strict definition of volunteering in place, which is necessary for research and to define what we do, it doesn't always line up with multicultural perceptions. So one, they don't see what they're doing as volunteering. Like Ivan said before, you know, in his community, volunteering is seen as, you know, it's the menial work, the scut work that people do and stuff. So they're not aware that what they're doing is volunteering, and they're aware it's valuable in the sense that it's culturally important, but they don't think of it as having that spillover value to the broader community and the benefit that comes from that. So helping them articulate that or understand that, and, you know, knowing that in order to impact and affect policy or investment decisions by philanthropists or corporates or others, that's the language they need to hear. Sometimes as a VIO or a volunteer manager, you can be the broker in terms of helping them articulate the value they create and communicating it to people and organisations who are potentially willing to invest and go, oh, okay, that's what you're doing. Yeah, well, that's good. That aligns with our values and what we're trying to achieve. So here's the $1 million to make your transport problem go away. It's that easy, isn't it? Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you all please join me in thanking our 4 presenters?